My name is April Lee, and I am so excited and honored to be your moderator today for such an important topic, Women of Color, Stories of Resilience. Whether this is the first session you have attended or one of many, we'd like to thank you so much for joining us, the Frederick County Chamber of Commerce, and all of our sponsors for S.H.E Week. I would like to thank the Frederick County Chamber of Commerce for developing S.H.E Week, and especially Jen Gerlach and Caitlin Walsh for their tireless work on the first ever virtual S.H.E Week. I don't know about all of you, but I am so excited to be surrounded by, even if only virtually, such outstanding women here in Frederick County and beyond. So thank you again for joining us. Before we begin, I'd like to ask a question to our panelists and to our participants. Today is going to be much of an open conversation. I want everyone on the panel and everyone who is participating to feel as though you are in a room with your closest, safest girlfriends, that you can share anything, talk about anything, and know that you're in a safe space. That is very important to all of us. So our first question that we're going to poll is, first, I want everybody to look down at the bottom of their screen so they can see the Q&A chat box. That is where you're going to submit all of your questions, and it will all be anonymous. So you can ask any question you want. There's no dumb question. There's no bad question. We just want to make sure that we are fostering communication with everyone. So the very first thing we're going to look at is, does anyone know the difference between being brave and being courageous? Whether you know the correct answer or not, go ahead and type it in the Q&A chat, and then we're going to go ahead and put that together, and we're going to share a little bit more information about that later in our conversation this morning. Okay, so we're going to see what kind of answers we get. And first, let me tell you that this is not super serious, so no need to Google, Alexa, or ask Siri any questions, just whatever comes to mind or heart. That's what's important. So first, I'm going to read a few housekeeping rules here until we have a few responses. Let's see here. Number one, I feel positive everyone already knows where their restroom, water, snacks, and coffee are located. So thank you again for joining us during your lunch break, coffee break, or just as you sit at home. Number two, I hope that everyone was able to print and pull up their virtual workbook for S.H.E Week. Much work and thought went into the workbook, and not only does it tell you all about S.H.E Week, it's also filled with amazing quotes, questions, and challenges for ourselves about how to put what we've learned this week into action. So I'm very excited about that. And lastly, another reminder, all questions should be typed below in the Q&A. And as I stated before, they are all anonymous. So you don't have to worry about anyone revealing or knowing who you are when you ask. Second, in our newest of normal of gathering virtually, please know that we are here to help support you if you have any technical issues. What does that mean? That means that while we all just love technology, we know at times it can let us down. So if any of our panelists are disconnected or we have any issues with sound, just know that we will immediately record with that particular panelist their story or any questions or answers that they may have for you so that you could see it at a later date on the Chamber website. Okay, so let's get back to our first question. We've got a couple of answers in, and let me tell you all, I feel like a news reporter. I have lots of paper and a telephone with questions on it, so I'm going to try to navigate between both. Some people are saying they have never even thought about the difference between bravery and courage. I know initially I thought that bravery and courage were pretty much the same. Someone said brave is acknowledging a fear, courage is confronting it, and brave is being able to do things outside of your norm. So let me tell you today a little bit about bravery. Bravery is actually defined as the ability to confront something painful or difficult or dangerous without any fear. It is a quality, not a state of mind. It doesn't need a cause to awaken it. Courage, on the other hand, is the ability to confront something painful or difficult or dangerous despite any fear. So moving forward, regardless of how fearful you may be. And I can honestly say that I agreed to participate in this panel as a woman of courage, because despite my fears about reliving painful, fearful, and even angering life experiences, I felt that today was important. So whether you are joining us today as a brave woman or person, or a courageous person, as a panel, we appreciate you joining us today and being open to hearing today's stories and using them to further the conversation with yourself, your partner, your children, your friends, and your family members. So while our panel is entitled Women of Color, Stories of Resilience, please keep in mind that the definition of resilience is the capacity to recover quickly from difficulties, toughness, the ability of a substance or object to spring back into shape or elasticity. While these are stories of survival, the resilience part takes time. People of color don't just recover quickly, and society tells us or portrays us as though we do. You will deal with racial pain every single day. So while we are resilient over time, it is not something that happens immediately. So again, my name is S.H.E, and together with my husband, Jason Lee, who was born and raised here in Frederick, we own Lee Building Maintenance. We both love serving our community. We have 3 amazing daughters, and most of all, I love to train, educate, and more importantly, learn from others, which is why I'm so happy to be part of today's panel. You keep hearing me say I'm so happy because this panel came just for me at the right time. And I'm so happy to be a part of it. So this morning, you're going to hear from Dr. Yvonne Smith, who will share her story of resilience and education. She has earned her bachelor's degree, her master's degree, and 2 doctorates. Sue Hough, owner and creative director of Octavo Designs, will share her story of resilience from childhood bullying and societal stereotypes. And Piper Crawford will share her story of resilience on motherhood from her perspective as a social science examiner, sacred medicine practitioner, beauty maven, and mama warrior to 4 extraordinary human beings and a wifey of 27 years. So, what should you expect during today's panel? You should expect to feel a sense of security, a sense of sisterhood, a sense of community, hearing true life experiences from women of color in our community who haven't always felt secure. You may experience a range of emotions today, from sadness to anger to outrage. However, we have made it a point as a panel to provide all of our participants and panelists with a safe space to share and educate. So before and after we hear from our panelists today, we're also going to participate in some poll questions like we did earlier. Some very important do's and don'ts when it comes to discussing race. We have a segment entitled Mild and Spicy, where we will discuss some of the hot button topics of today. And most importantly, we want to leave plenty of time for our Q&A from you, our participants. So let's get started. I'm going to read a little bit about an article that was printed in the Seattle Times. The Seattle Times published an article by Melissa Healy, a writer for the Los Angeles Times, that states, "Science confirms that women reap health benefits from friendships, that women are keepers of each other's secrets, boosters of one another's wavering confidence, co-conspirators in life's adventures, through laughter, tears, and an inexhaustible river of talk. They keep each other well and make each other better. But the power of girlfriends is beginning to yield its secrets to science. For women, friendship not only rules, it protects and promotes healing. Protects. It buffers the hardships of life's transitions, lowers blood pressure, boosts immunity, and promotes healing. It might help explain why women on average have longer life expectancies than men. Why did I feel that was important to share? I felt it was important to share because it tells us that women make each other better and that we promote healing. That tells me that women can do anything we put our minds to, including having crucial conversations about race today. We know that for some, stories or discussions about race can be a scary topic to approach. Trust me when I say we took painstaking efforts to ensure we share our stories today that educate, inform, and promote positive discussion during this segment and beyond. We encourage you to continue talking and sharing with your friends after this panel to help promote positive change in your families, friend circles, your communities, and along your travels. We want you to know that you're in safe hands. This is a safe space to share your own stories, ask questions, express concerns, and more importantly, learn more about your female counterparts who just happen to be women of color. If you have a question you'd like to ask, remember to put it in the Q&A below, which goes to Caitlin, so that at the appropriate time we may read your question. All answers are posted anonymously again, so please feel free to ask the hard questions you feel you can't ask anyone else. This is the best time to ask all the questions you may be too afraid to ask your friends of color. Or if you do not have friends of color, this is a safe space for you to learn about the experiences of people from other cultures. Do not be hard on yourself or others. Have an open mind, a heart of forgiveness, and let us stay away from racial slurs today. So we've already started our poll, and so I'll let everybody know that our second poll is never have I ever. I'm not sure who's ever played this game before, but what we'd like you to do is select any and all statements, compliments that either you have said or someone you know has said. You can choose them all, any that apply. We'll be talking about these answers a little bit later in the conversation today as well. So the first person we are going to hear from today is Dr. Yvonne Smith. You can read her full bio again in the She We Work With. But I'm going to tell you a little bit about Dr. Yvonne. Dr. Yvonne Smith, a native of Dayton, Ohio, received her BA degree in sociology and psychology from Indiana University, her first master's degree in clinical social work from Indiana University, her second master's degree in clinical psychology from the Fielding Graduate University of Santa Barbara, California, her first PhD in sociology and urban studies from the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, and a second PhD in clinical psychology from the Fielding Graduate University, Santa Barbara, California. Dr. Yvonne Smith, please share your story with us this morning.
Thank you to the moderator for that introduction. And thanks to you, the audience, for your participation in this memorable event. Now, if you can bear with me for just a couple of minutes, I want to do a short academic overview, and then I promise that I will get to my very, very personal story of resilience. Now, this is a time in our history of notable racial unrest and strives for equality. This is also the first time in our history when a woman of color, Black and Asian, is on a major political platform running for vice president. Her very presence represents the crossroads between racial equality, racial inequality, and gender. A triumph for all women, regardless of the color of their skin. Now, the meeting of race inequality and the impact on women is a formidable intersection, okay? Now, my story and my life story of resilience is composed of repeated experiences of this intersection. Specifically, I'm going to look at the intersection of the institutional racism in our educational system and the direct effect of this institutional racism on me, an African-American woman. Now, as a scientist, my presentation is based in a scientific theory of intersectionality. You can write that down and look it up later. If you take critical race theory on one hand and add the womanist theory on the other hand, it's used to support the concept and the theory of intersectionality. I do want to give credit to Miss Rhonda Cotton, a doctoral student that I have been working with, and she is investigating the race inequalities and effects on African American women in higher education. So she is doing a lot more research on the concept of intersectionality. Okay, getting ready to start, but we do need a definition of racism so that we are all on the same page. Get out your pen and pencil, and you might want to write this down, not just for today, but to share with other people and to come back to always. Racism is a system where institutions, patterns, and habits tend to have an adverse effect upon a minority group. One is causation and one is effect. Now that's all I'll say about that for now, and keep that close by because we will mention it later. Okay, that's the end of the introduction. I'm going to begin my very personal story of resilience. Now this will take a linear approach, and it's a snapshot of me across time as I matriculated through the educational system here in the United States, from elementary school through my 2 doctoral programs, and the effects of institutional racism on my personal and professional life. A true testament of resilience. Now, let's start. What about my experiences in elementary school? Well, let's turn back the clock a little bit. The time is 1950s. I grew up in an all-Black neighborhood. I went to an all-Black church. I saw movies only in an all-Black theater located in the Madam C.J. Walker building in Indianapolis, Indiana. And if you have not seen the movie, Madam Walker, you might want to see that. And of course, I went to an all-Black school. Now, my experience was enriching. My experience was powerful. My all-Black faculty nourished me and they guided me. They identified me as a pupil with potential. And so I remember they sent my parents a note. They asked me to take a note home one day. I thought I was in trouble. But they sent a note home asking them to come in for a special parent-teacher conference. So they set the template for a coordinated effort between the school and my parents to ensure my scholastic success. Now, for those of you who are into statistics, I later learned as an adult working as a counselor in the Indianapolis public school system that my IQ was in the 3rd standard deviation above the mean, somewhere in the top 99.7 percentile. So this statistic captured the attention of my teachers. Now, so elementary school, for me, in a segregated school, was a most positive experience. Now, I don't give you that IQ information for no reason. I will come back to that in a moment. So the institutional pattern of segregation, while separate but equal, and separate but unequal at the time, especially in terms of fiscal viability, books and supplies, things of that nature. This segregated school worked to my academic advantage. Support was provided to help build my resilience. So, noted, the resilience was learned. I was moving on. Now, what about my experiences in high school? The time is now 1960. I had to make a decision. Should I continue in an all-Black school, which was Crispus Attucks High School? It's a pretty famous school. Or should I attend a predominantly white but integrated high school? Now, my Black mentors encouraged me to attend the all-Black school, certain that I would shine as the valedictorian or salutatorian. Against their advice, however, I chose to go to the integrated high school simply because I wanted to be better prepared for college when I knew I would be attending with white students. Now, the entire school of around 2,400 students, there were only a few who got straight A's and a small percentage of those who made National Honor Society. Now, in my class, I was the only Black student who was inducted into the National Honor Society. Now, my name also regularly appeared in the local Indianapolis paper regarding my scholastic achievements as a straight A student. I was the first Black student to break this barrier. Now, why all of this information about what I've done? Institutional racism had patterns of exclusion and dismissal readily at work. So in spite of my academic achievement, my school counselor was only willing to help me get into a vocational school. I could get no help for getting into college. I had straight A's, I was in the National Honor Society, it did not matter. But I had been mentored well by my parents and by my Black educators. So on my own volition, I had to apply to college, do everything that other students had assistance doing, and I was accepted into Indiana University, Bloomington, Indiana. Resilience noted, I was moving on. So what about my experiences in the university? Click forward. The time is now 1964, fall. This was the first time in the history of the university that they had integrated dorms. Excuse me for using the word dorms. I never graduated to using the term residence halls. I moved into a beautiful brand new dormitory, spiral staircases. I felt like I was a little princess. I felt like I was living a dream. But while the dorms were integrated, IU maintained an institutional pattern of segregation. Segregated fraternities, segregated sororities. There was no Black representation on many of the student boards, etc. Then the racial awakenings of the 60s came. It took hold in our society, and of course, they were enhanced and manifested on the campus as well. So a large segment of the Black student population participated in the marches. Now, I chose to take some of the board positions that came open so that there would be representation of people of color on the boards. I do have to say I was ridiculed by some of my Black student friends for not marching, but that was okay. I was providing representation on some boards. Now, in addition, as a Black student, I was subject to racial intimidation just trying to get to and from campus, from home to campus. It was about a 50-mile trip. Now, this was Southern Indiana. The Ku Klux Klan was alive and well. And indeed, they murdered one Black female student during her summer job traveling between Indianapolis and Bloomington. So institutional patterns of racism in the community certainly impacted our educational endeavors. We were always concerned about just trying to get home for Christmas. I thank God that I had the Black fraternal system to provide a cocoon of a very enriching environment inside a highly segregated campus. Parties, our activities, our socializing, study groups were all available within the Black sub-community in spite of the institutional racism of Indiana University. And with that, I succeeded. Resilience noted, I graduated with a degree in sociology and psychology, and I moved on. Now, what about my experiences as a professional inside the educational institution? Well, one of my earlier jobs was as a sociologist with the city of Indianapolis. I kept that for about a year, but I was granted a position as a social worker and counselor in the Indianapolis public school system under the condition that I would begin my master's degree, that first master's degree, within 2 years. So the time is now about 1970. Now, to my dismay, what did I see inside the schools in the white neighborhoods where I was assigned is just amazing. Let me share it with you. Young Black scholars, much like myself, academically gifted, succeeding in the all Black schools, were now bused to all white schools. This was, of course, mandated integration of schools as a result of some of the advantages of the civil rights movements. However, I watched in horror as I listened to the racist and attacking comments of the white teachers. Now, remember, no one, well, don't remember, let me explain to you, no one spoke directly to me, these white teachers, because neither the students or the Black faculty and staff were welcome there. They spoke around me as though I was not there, as though I was invisible. They spoke openly about not wanting them, the Black students there, and their decisions to give them all those grades. So the outcome, the Black students, all of them, scholars, the average students, and the low achievers were all graded unfairly and uniformly. The ones who had received all A's in their all Black schools now received straight B's and F's. This was a rude awakening for me. I was very upset about this. I was a young, new Black professional. The integrated educational institutions were not operating to the benefit of our Black kids. The integrated educational elementary schools in Indianapolis began a spiral of underachievement for Black youth. What did I learn from this experience? Well, I needed to help build the resilience of others. How do you save kids in an environment like this? And I needed to reinforce my own resilience. So I pursued the first doctorate degree. Resilience noted, I was moving on. What about my experience as a PhD student? The time is now about 1984. Now, during the run for the finish line, my dissertation committee, made up of all white males, one white female, and one Black male, okay? And the only one white female there tried to hijack my research to make me start over. And I do have to interject here. When I was doing a workshop on racism, they made a comment, and you can think about this. The comment is, once you institutionalize Blacks and once you institutionalize women, they act just like whites. And so I was shocked to find that the one female in there was the one trying to hijack my research. So I was devastated. I was in tears. They wanted me to start over with the research. The purpose, I was told later, was to discourage me. Perhaps I would drop out. Perhaps I would be another person with an ABD. And if you don't know what that is, if you don't know what that means, it means all but dissertation. And there are a lot of people, white, Black, and otherwise, running around with an ABD. Got there, but didn't quite cross the finish line. Now, there was one Black male, the statistician, who stood up for me and wouldn't let this travesty take place. Those were his words, not mine. She backed down. She was not happy, but in retaliation, she gave me a B. It was an A++ project. It was the only B in my entire doctoral program for that first PhD. But it was okay. I was now doctor. Resilience noted. I was moving on. What about my experiences as dean and professor in higher education? This was in the 80s and 90s and the 2000s, up to 2006. We had moved from Indiana to Wisconsin. The issues, I found that there were issues of never enough. I completed one PhD. I applied for a job at one university, and the woman there, a white female this time, well, the other was white female also, threw my application in the circular file. It just so happened I knew someone that hired me. I applied for a job as Dean of Students at Marquette University, but I was unable to get service at the library because I was Black. They thought I was a student. I was like invisible. The white students now living within an integrated system with, the white students now living in an integrated system with the Black students at Marquette would stare at their roommates at night. And the students kept coming back saying, I can't believe this. So they would say, what's going on? And believe it or not, the old story that Blacks aren't human and grow tails or release their tails at night was alive and well. And this was the whole time I was in Milwaukee. This was a frequently occurring question at Marquette University, UWM, and Concordia University. I worked at all three. I was a professor and administrator at all three, and I personally heard these questions. Students had to find some way to be resilient with that kind of racial profile. Racism was so prominent that a panel devised a racism workshop, and it was called Racism, the Dividing Line. The definition for racism I gave you came from this. So I was denied the right to get licensed in Wisconsin on an equivalency statute. This was another experience. I was warned by the licensing board that why don't you just go be, I don't know, a social worker or a counselor? You don't need to be a psychologist, okay? Well, I appealed and they allowed me to sit for the exam and told me I didn't pass. I learned years later that I had indeed passed. feeling the institutional patterns of racism and that they were trying to prevent me from practicing as a psychologist, I had to make a decision. My colleagues, especially my white male colleagues, they were great. They said, sue the state, sue them so that you can get this done. I said, yeah, I'm not going to sue the state. I'll just get a second PhD. He said, you're crazy. Well, this explains the processes behind why I have 2 PhDs. Truly requiring resilience. I'm moving on. So what about my experiences as a student for my second PhD? The year is now around 2006. I do have to briefly mention what happened. When heading for the finish line of this second PhD, the committee wanted me to, quote, once again, redo the research. Does that sound familiar? Now, my whole family had convened in Santa Barbara, California. We had flown out. We were celebrating. We had gone out for my commencement. And I was told while there, the day before commencement, that I had to redo the research because they had a question and I couldn't graduate. Couldn't graduate? My whole family was here. We were here for the commencement. I was just beyond words. I was tearful. I was inconsolable. So the purpose, again, I was told later, was to discourage me. Perhaps I'd drop out. Perhaps, again, I'd become another Black ABD. So they decided, after convening, because I was so upset, they decided that they were facing a lawsuit. I'm not a litigious person. I probably would not have sued them, but they were afraid that I would. And so they said, okay, they would allow me to finish, but a Black administrator came to my defense and saved the day for me. So once again, I received 1 B, and that was for that situation once again, and the only B I received in the second PhD program. But I persevered, I obtained my second PhD, resilience noted, I was moving on. So in closing, I want to make 3 points here. What effect have these repeated exposures to racism had on me? Now, some people would say I'm pushy. Some people would say I'm demanding. Some people would say you've just got a real strong A personality. Probably true to all of those. But my life experiences have made me determined. They have taught me to pursue my goal, no matter what it is, to just keep going. And the resilience has taught me to fight for the security of myself, my family, my children, my grandchildren. My lifestyle demonstrates the advantages of economic success and professional success in spite of the institutional racism. However, when I look around and we look around us, we are now currently in the midst of another social unrest. So many things have not changed. So I was always told, to whom much is given and earned, much is expected. So, number 2, what is my goal? What am I expected to do? Having acquired this resilience, I am resilient, but there's work to do. My major concern today is to be able to be involved in the continual work for Black equality and gender equality, building resilience for self and others. Finally, number 3, what have I learned from this life of repeated exposure to institutional racism? Well, listen carefully. I've learned, and I can say affirmatively and definitively, that no non-Black, non-brown, non-yellow, non-red person can declare the presence or absence of racism. Remember that little definition I gave earlier? One is cause, one is effect. I have learned that the non-Black person is on the causation side of the equation. The person of non-color does not have the insight or the knowledge or the existential ability to comment on the presence, the absence, or the degree of racism. Don't take that personal. It's just a statement of fact that I have learned. And having experienced racism all of my life, only persons of color can make critical assessments on the state of racism. And thus, I have learned to be resilient. I've shared my life story and my experiences with institutional racism, yet I have been resilient. I've been taught resilience, and yes, I'm moving on. And I close with a poem of resilience. And I said this actually when I graduated with my second doctorate degree. This is a poem of resilience I learned in college. When things get rough, as they sometimes will. When the road you travel seems all uphill, when your funds are low and your debts are high, and you want to laugh, but you have to cry. When life is getting you down a bit, rest if you must, but don't you quit. Success is failure turned inside out, the golden tinge of a cloud of doubt. You never can tell how close you are. You may be near when you seem so far. So don't give up when you're hardest hit. It's when things seem worst that you must not quit. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you so much, Dr. Yvonne. I know that if we were in a room full of people, we would be clapping, cheering, and standing. Thank you so much for that story of resilience and for teaching us to move on. Next, let me just tell everybody, thank you so much for all the questions that are coming in through the Q&A. We greatly appreciate it. For time's sake, though, we are going to move on to Sue Hough of Octavo Designs, located here in Frederick, Maryland, so that we have plenty of time for Q&A in the end. So as I mentioned earlier, Sue is the owner and creative director of Octavo Designs, located here in Frederick, Maryland. Sue is a woman with a huge heart for Frederick entrepreneurs and has a keen knack for connecting the right people with one another. I know because I am one of those recipients of her kindness. Octavo Designs is the largest and most well-known agency for brand strategy, logos, and identity, custom websites, package design, and marketing communications. Sue's story of resilience, navigating daily ridicule from classmates, strangers, and even some uncomfortable family members is a very stirring one. So let's all listen in to Sue Hough. Thank you so much, Sue, are you being a woman of courage today or a woman of bravery?
That's very good. All right, so good morning. In light of recent events, I thought it was important to include this topic as a part of S.H.E Week. I would like to thank the Chamber and Jen Gerlach for bringing my idea to fruition. And I'm so honored to be in the company of these three amazing women. Okay. So I have to admit to being nervous since I am publicly sharing my story for the first time, but racism has been a factor for me all of my life. To give you some background, I was abandoned as a baby. I was born in Seoul, Korea, and I don't know my real birth date. They made up the date based on my body size. My adoption form said I was given up because I had double lids, which signified that I wasn't full-blooded Korean. This meant my only future in Korea would have been as a prostitute. My only hope of a decent future was to be adopted out of the country, which I was. I came to America when I was 3 and was very lucky to be adopted by a family that had 2 kids of their own and grew up with them in the Midwest. If you've ever been to the Midwest, you know it's very white. There were no children of color, much less there were no one around that would look like me. So the name calling started for me on the playground in kindergarten. Even now, I struggle hearing certain words and saying them aloud is going to make me cringe. But I was hit with names like pancake face or flat face. Kids would use their fingers to pull their eyes back to make fun of me. And it turned meaner later, evolving into names like Chink, Ching Chang Wa, or bowing and saying, ah, so. Even my grandfather would feel compelled to bring up his Asian dry cleaner every time I saw him. School memories for me, I wish I could forget, are riding the bus, recess, and class trips, which equate to pain, embarrassment, and humiliation. 3 words is what I was continuously told. Just ignore it. Hard to do when it's all day, every day, for years. Hard to do when you're young and you wish you could just fit in. Just ignore the teasing, the taunts, and the threats. If you cry, it will only make them do it more. I grew up not only hating what I looked like, but also my culture and myself. I had no interest in learning about my heritage since I had no one I could relate to that was Korean. I was what you would call a banana, yellow on the outside and white on the inside. After one particularly bad day of the name calling, I remember coming home and telling my dad that I was going to show everyone. I was going to be smart and get straight A's so that even if they were calling me names, they could never call me stupid. It got so bad that in the 5th grade, the principal of the school pulled me out of the classroom so he could speak directly to the class and tell them to stop, which of course they didn't. The bullying and name calling continued until the 7th grade, when my family moved to the East Coast. Suddenly, I wasn't the only minority in school. I had friends and life got better. Now that doesn't mean the name calling or racial cracks stopped. Today, I still experience it in various forms, and it still makes me uncomfortable. It ranges from people asking if I've taste tested the Japanese beer before it shipped over, to people yelling names at me out of the car, and even friends making Asian references or jokes to me. People ask me why I don't say anything to correct them. They don't understand. I've been conditioned to just ignore it. I was recently in the grocery store where a young girl used her fingers to pull back her eyes in front of her mom at me. It transported me right back to that playground with that feeling of being hopelessly alone and sad. Her mom didn't correct her behavior. To her, it was perfectly okay. As a professional, I am a member of the City of Frederick's Minority Business Enterprise Panel, which is actively working to help make recommendations to guide the city's policy for minority business procurement. One of the men in the group told the others that he would like to have dinner with the other Black men in our group. Again, I was reminded that I was not the right color. It pains me to think that ethnic jokes and racism are still considered acceptable today. You'll find it in movies, cartoons, and television. Some great examples are Breakfast at Tiffany's. Most people love that movie. But take a look at Mickey Rooney portraying the stereotypical Asian character. Even DreamWorks Kung Fu Panda's portrayal of characters, along with their names and jokes, are racist and demeaning. Racism is a learned behavior. Kids are being fed jokes early on by society and family. You might not even notice it, but I do. We need to stop letting the jokes and stereotyping being okay in our world. Businesses need to stop letting this be okay. It's not okay. To this day, I still struggle going into crowds, like AKA adult playgrounds now, to meet new people and start a conversation. I'm very introverted, and as a result of my experiences, I tend to blend into the background. I have to work hard at getting to know new people and letting them in. While these negative experiences have affected my life, they have also made me resilient. Today, I own my own business. I'm a female minority entrepreneur and a proud member of the Frederick community. I am a big supporter of the underdog, people who are disadvantaged or wronged. I enjoy working with minority businesses and helping them realize their dreams through advice, networking, help, and design services. I look forward to the day where we all succeed as females and people of color. That's it. Thanks.
Again, I think that if we were in a crowded auditorium, people would be standing, crying, and wiping their eyes. Thank you for being so brave and courageous to share that with us today. I do have a couple of questions for you, if you don't mind. The first one is, in the day and age of what many may refer to as cancel culture, just in case anyone out there is not familiar with cancel culture, it refers to the popular practice of basically withdrawing support from a company or a person based on things they may have said or done in the past, or the present. I'm sorry. Cancel culture is generally discussed as being performed on social media in the form of group shaming. So Sue, in this age of cancel culture, what do you think is the best approach to educate our children, family, and friends about celebrating movies, television shows, cartoons, and even physical gestures which portray people of color or ethnic groups in negative ways.
Okay, so I personally am not a fan of the group shaming for with cancel culture. I do think parents and family should be aware when they're watching television or watching movies. At that moment, they could stop and point out what is wrong with that. And I mean, other than I understand if things are kind of like a repeated offense with some things, then I'm all about group shaming. So there you go.
Well, and I have to be honest and tell you, I agree with you on that. It's very hard. But education and really looking at ourselves in the way that we speak with our children is very important, and it starts there. My other question for you is, you mentioned the Audrey Hepburn movie, Breakfast at Tiffany's. Audrey Hepburn's very celebrated movie version of Breakfast at Tiffany's has a character named Mr. S.H.E, a photographer portrayed by a white actor named Mickey Rooney, who is in yellow face. For anyone who doesn't know what that is, it's putting on white or yellow makeup to appear to be more Asian. Or if you were a black person, putting on blackface, it is the same. They also portrayed him with buck teeth, and he used an exaggerated Japanese accent while speaking. While most people don't see him as a significant character in the movie, will you please speak to why this character's portrayal is hurtful and why it is important that we as people think twice before creating theme parties, celebrating movies which portray people of color as stereotypes, or any of those types of things? Again, not saying we want to cancel a culture, but how do we correct that behavior?
Right. Well, I hadn't seen that movie until only a couple of years ago. I've even attended the Breakfast at Tiffany's event. I think I've even purchased a picture with Audrey Hepburn's image on it. But I went to watch it a couple of years ago and I couldn't finish the movie. It was very upsetting. So, and sorry, it's just and I think at this point, and I'm sure as women of color, you understand that you get to the point where you're so oversensitized by things that even the smallest things can upset you. So I couldn't watch the movie, and I would hope that all of us would not want things out there and celebrate things that are going to be out there that are hurtful to others. So I can't celebrate it.
So to the person who may be in the audience saying, man, well, what can we celebrate? What should we do? How do you think people can better educate themselves before putting on these types of events? Or not just events, but we all put on parties or theme ideas. Everyone loves the glamour of old Hollywood and Audrey Hepburn. But how do we be sensitive without canceling?
It's a great point. I want people to be able to celebrate. I mean, she's such an iconic figure, and
Sure.
But I don't know that you should possibly be putting that as a centerpiece of your event if you could possibly be offending that many people. I think you need to maybe watch the movie before you are going to put your event around that as your signature thing.
And I understand what you're saying. It's even though he is a secondary character, he is portrayed differently in the movie than he is in the book. And you're basically saying, take a look at things, look at them. Could they possibly be offensive to someone? Would you even suggest that they reach out and ask someone, hey, is this possibly offensive?
Oh, definitely. But
Yeah.
if I can't even watch the movie because I was that upset, that's something to consider.
All right. And which tells us why diversity is so important. So last question. Can you share your perspective on why you think people tend to use racial stereotypes or references when meeting or getting to know people of color? Why do, for me as a Black woman, I know that people will come up to me and say, hey girl, well, you know, I feel some type of way about that. If I'm not in an environment where I know that person doesn't actually believe all women of color or Black women act that way, I find it insulting when people do that if I don't have a personal, safe relationship with you. And I've said that to Jen Gerlach before. I have a very hard time making friends with people if I am not able to believe that they are a safe space. And so I look at my friends that way. If something were to happen bad and my child were with you, would you protect them from racial injustice, even if it's just a racial slur? I'm not expecting a person to fight, but I am expecting you to be able to either defend, protect, or explain to my child why they were called what they were called.
Right. I think a lot of people tend to do that. They're joking and they're falling back on stereotypes because they kind of think it's funny, and they think they're creating that connection or bridge with you. And I don't think they really understand how offensive it can be. And it's not funny. Again, like I said, I think we're all, and I'm probably a little bit more sensitive to hearing those things. So it's actually worse than you think it is when you're making that joke.
Exactly.
Yeah. So
you're already dreading it happening, and then and you're praying in your mind, don't do it, please don't do it, don't do it. And then they do it, and then you go, hoping that person was either different, or now you're stuck in a scenario where you have to be polite because you don't want, it's so sad, we're protecting the other person's feelings when
right.
really you're the one that's been offended. So yes, I can completely understand what you're saying. Thank you so much for sharing that. And again, everyone, thank you so much for the questions that are coming in through the Q&A, and we're going to continue to address those. Sue, again, thank you so much for sharing your amazing story. We're going to have Piper go ahead and share her story, and let me tell you all a little about Piper. As I mentioned earlier, Piper is a social science examiner, sacred medicine practitioner, beauty maven, and mama warrior to 4 extraordinary human beings. I can personally attest to that. Extraordinary human beings, and a wife of 27 years. And my personal makeup artist. Thank you. Piper, share.
Okay. All right. So Sue and Dr. Yvonne, who happens to be my mom, have both eloquently shared stories highlighting and mitigating some of their personal experiences. I wanted to approach today's conversation from both my children's perspectives as well as my own, in an effort to show how far, wide, and deep systematic racism and the inherent privilege it provides European Americans goes. For those of you who are mothers or who want to be mothers or who just care about children and their emotional and physical well-being, I hope that what I'm about to share with you will open your eyes, will open your hearts, and open your minds. Excuse me. And I hope that it upsets you enough to shift you from simply being a non-racist who engages in what we call performative allyship to actively being anti-racist, who raise the children in their lives to do and be the same. And like manners and personal hygiene, being anti-racist begins young, and it begins at home. Excuse me. Whoops. My husband and I have been married for almost 28 years. We're both college educated, as are our parents. We raised our 4 children, 3 boys and 1 girl, in Lake Linganore. I was a stay-at-home mom for 10 years before going back to work in the beauty industry. We did everything right, and yet all of these stories I'm going to share with you are true. They happened to my children at different times in their lives over the course of the last 14 years right here in Frederick County. While I share, I'd like you to indulge me. I'm going to ask that you all just close your eyes and take a moment to exit your heads, drop into your body and into your feelings, and imagine if it were a child that you love having these experiences. Okay. So my daughter, when she was in middle school, her hair is locked like mine, and she was told that it was dirty and that it was gross and that she shouldn't wear it that way. In high school, she was alerted that there was a prettiest Black girls list and that she was at the very top. And this was shared with her in confidence and like something that she should be excited about. And her whole life has been she gets, told consistently, you're pretty for a Black girl. You're pretty for a Black girl. The white guys in high school wanted to hook up with her and they wanted to, in private and in secret, but none of them wanted to date her openly. They were concerned about how their parents felt or how their friends would feel or what they would say. But it didn't stop them from trying to, get with her. And that was very confusing and very upsetting for her. Also in high school, in a history class, I'm sure well-meaning white teacher says to the class, my daughter is the only student of color in the class, the only Black person in class. And the teacher says, I want you all to imagine what it would have been like a day in the life for, a 14-year-old in the 1700s, United States, or whatever. And my daughter kind of raised her hand awkwardly and she was like, I'm pretty sure I would have been a slave. So, and she felt really awkward. The teacher was embarrassed. I mean, it was just one of those things where, So my middle son, in middle school, when he entered middle school, he was told by several white students that he acted white and that he didn't talk like a Black person and he wasn't, using slang or ebonics or ghetto or whatever. And so for a while there, he was trying to, around those kids, he would try to talk and act more Black and feeding into those negative connotations and stereotypes of how those white children perceived what being Black is, so that those white children, would see my son as being a Black person. And it took him a couple years before he realized the lunacy in that. And he realized that everything he says and does is exactly like a Black person, because if he's doing it, then it's something that a Black person and that Black people do. So another thing with him, he was driving. Some of you may know there's a hill going down Moosetter in between the Greens and Holly Hills. He was driving and caught that hill and his speed. So he was pulled over by a white female police officer, and she was polite. But when she walked up to the window, what normally do police officers say, license and registration? She did not do that. He was in the car with two friends who were white females also. And so he said, she walked up to the car. He rolled down the window. She looked through the window, looked straight at the girls and said, are you okay? And they were like, yeah. And then she asked them where they were going. And the one girl in the passenger seat answered. And then she asked them if they felt safe. And they were like, yeah. And then she just kept dialoguing with the young lady in the passenger seat. She ignored my son completely. She didn't talk to him. At some point, I guess she got his license and registration. But she just didn't acknowledge his presence and only spoke with the white young lady, his friend, in the passenger seat. He just felt invisible. And then she let him off with a warning. But he was relieved that these girls were with him, because he had this felt sense that had he maybe been by himself or in the car with, other people of color, friends of color, that something different could have happened. And he was also grateful that his friends understood the position of privilege that they were in to help assist this situation to ensure that it went more smoothly. My youngest son, when he was about 3 or 4 years old, we were at a carnival in Mount Airy, and a young lady, she came over there and she started petting him on the head like he was a puppy. And she declares to her mom, Mom, his hair feels like carpet. I looked at the mom, I'm waiting for her to say something. She did not make eye contact with me. She ignored both me and my son. She smiled indulgently at her daughter, and then she just led her away. This same child in high school, he always got a ride to and from school. And so he never rode the bus. Well, I don't remember what happened, that he missed the bus home. And so he missed his ride home. So he needed to take the bus for the first time ever. So naturally he gets to the bus. He and a friend who happened to be white were getting ready to get on the bus. Neither one of them have ever ridden the bus. And the bus driver is like, I don't know you, who are you? And they tell her who they are and where they're going. And she lets the white kid on the bus who she didn't know. She's looking at my son and he's like trying to get on the bus. And she's like, where do you live? He told her where she lived. She would not let him on the bus unless he showed ID. And what's particularly upsetting about that is that the white kid who was friends with him, who was getting on the bus, who she didn't know either, who she let on the bus, did not even live in our neighborhood. He lives a couple neighborhoods over and would not have ridden that bus, but she allowed him on, and my son had to show ID. My oldest son, when he was 10, we were relatively new to the neighborhood. He was playing in our cul-de-sac with a group of neighborhood kids, a whole bunch of kids. And a father of two of the kids out there playing referred to my son as that little monkey and a darky while making monkey noises and hand gestures. This is an adult in front of a whole bunch of children. Needless to say, my husband had to go down there and have a conversation with him. It was uncomfortable and it was not fun and it was not okay. This same son, after high school, came back, was partying with friends up in Liberty Town. He was the only Black person at this party. He was the only person of color at this party. And there was some drinking and, then somebody said, drop the N-word. So my son takes issue and he speaks up and he just leaves the house. And, as he's leaving, the taunts start following because, I don't know and I'm going to say some words here. So, where you going, nigger? Where what's wrong, nigger? That kind of thing, etc. Some other people started chiming in and it's starting to get a little, tense. My son is feeling unsafe. He's getting nervous because he's the only person of color there in Liberty Town. And so my son's friends start arguing with these kids who were, kicking up this stuff. My son leaves the house and goes and gets into the Jeep of the friend that he came with. And he's kind of like texting his friends and he's like, I'm in the car, let's go. And his friends don't know that he got in the car. So now they're looking for him. His friends are looking for him. They're like, they're calling out my son's name. And the other kids are getting worked up and they're like, yeah, where is he? Where's that nigger? When we find him, we're going to F him up and we're going to do all this kind of stuff. My son's in the car, terrified. His friends are furious because they can't find him. And they're like, we're not leaving without him. It was a mess. And so finally, luckily, his friends realize, they get the text, they get in the car, they leave. What infuriated me, it's all upsetting, but what's really alarming about this is that he knew these kids. He went to high school with these kids. They cheered for him and supported him when he played football for them. So, he felt safe in his head going to the party, and then he gets there and this happens. So these stories barely scratch the surface of what they have had to deal with and continue to deal with every day. And my children are resilient because despite these instances, they were all high achieving, well-mannered and behaved students. Despite these instances, my son is a talented graphic artist. Despite these experiences, my daughter was a state-ranked gymnast. Despite these experiences and others, they were all captain of their sports team. Despite these experiences, my son received academic scholarships. Despite these experiences, all of them excel socially. Despite these experiences, my daughter graduated top of her class from Hough University. Despite these experiences, my son entered the Peace Corps. And yet none of these successes has protected or will protect any of them from experiencing racism. And yet they continue to excel and be great because they know their worth. Resilience, the ability to withstand or recover quickly from difficult conditions. I am resilient. I am resilient because of the mother that I had and because of her mother and all of our ancestors. I am resilient because that is what Black women are. Resiliency is what we do. It is how we are able to get up every morning and do all of the things that everyone else does while also managing daily microaggressions. I am resilient because I thrive in a system that is designed in every way for me to fail. I'm resilient because I have raised 4 incredibly funny, talented, intelligent, thoughtful, compassionate, well-adjusted, emotionally grounded, spiritually intact human beings. I am resilient because I have raised them in an oftentimes well-meaning and intention, though also still hostile environment. And I've done this while navigating a multi-generational, terror-filled fear for their lives every single day. I am resilient because I understand that I have a divine right to be here on this earth, in this country, and take up space like everyone else. I rattle my chains because I want to be free. And at the heart of this freedom I so desperately want for myself and my children lies my resiliency. Dismantling and unlearning racism and white supremacy is not tweetable. It's not Facebookable or Instagrammable. You will cry. This kind of shadow or soul work is profoundly existential. It's a deep dive into your inner self and your inner psyche. A lot of times it will feel awful. You may even experience despair or melancholy. It's challenging and it's hard. But guess what? We can do hard things. A woman named Sonia Gupta said of doing this work, it can be very lonely and isolating. It will shatter your ego and your belief system. Do it anyway. Thank you.
That is beautiful, Piper. Thank you so much. I'd like to just thank everyone on our panel today. Again, Piper, I'm not being biased, but if we were in a crowded auditorium,
Thanks.
many claps, many claps. To be able to deal with that when it comes to your children is very hard. We all want to protect our kids. And to see them hurt is just devastating. But we also don't want to discount their feelings. And I go back to what Sue said when she was taught, oh, just ignore it. And I think a lot of us are taught that. And then that brings on the daily microaggressions when we haven't dealt with the issues truly at hand. So may I ask you a few questions?
You may.
Thank you so much. My first question is, research shows that racism obviously is a learned quality, and you touched a little bit on this today. What would you say to parents who do not consider themselves to be racist, but their children tend to relate to people of color based on stereotypes, such as people they see on television, whether it be Fresh Prince of Bel-Air or any other Black stereotypical character you might find on TV? What do you say to those parents who see this behavior? What do you say to those parents who see that behavior, and how do they correct that?
Well, I think it goes to what I was saying, let me take my glasses off, earlier. It just begins at home, and it begins when they're really young. You know, having that conversation with your kids and being willing to have hard conversations even with your children and saying to them, listen, I see that you're really interested in this, and kind of finding out that, you know, what their interest is, what is it that they're relating to, why is it this particular thing, making sure that there's media in the home that shows a wide category of people's experiences in different cultures and all kinds of things. But I just think the most important thing is educating your kids and talking to your kids and not allowing things to go thinking, oh, it'll be fine, or it's just a TV show, or it's just something. I think it's really important to catch it when you see it. And of course, you have to be aware of it yourself. And if you aren't educated yourself, or you don't know anything about that yourself, then how are you going to be able to help your kids? So it's important for parents to arm themselves with the necessary tools and education so that they can guide their children as well. And that's that component of being anti-racist as opposed to just being not racist.
Okay. So I'm going to ask you a Black culture question. So as we know, Black culture tends to influence, and so does Asian culture as well, influence the way that we dress these days. Well, let's just say for many generations, it has influenced, you know, fashion, it's influenced music, it's influenced so many things. What do you say to those parents whose kids say, man, you know what, I like the the saggy pants look, or I like this look that people associate with being Black. Because many people may think, well, maybe I'm allowing my child to be racist if I allow them to dress that way. So what is the difference between copying, a cultural look versus racism?
Sure, I think that's the key, isn't it, to cultural appropriation, is sort of giving credit where credit's due. I think, a lot of times Blacks or people of color will be at the forefront of something that's popular and exciting and innovative in the culture, and yet we're not given the credit for it. There's the whole thing with Elvis Presley, and he tapped into deep roots and songs, and he just didn't give credit. He just ignored that. And so if there's nothing wrong with celebrating and being excited about and wearing, that's an honor, right? But when you are not willing then to also behave and conduct your day-to-day life in a way that also lends to the support of this culture. Are you purchasing also from, Black businesses or, other businesses of color while you're getting this? Are you also in your language, when you're dialoguing with people and when you're interacting with people, when you see anti-racist behavior, are you calling it out? Are you being a person who is not just sort of dressing and looking like, but then are you also aware and cognizant of the struggles that come with the cultures that are giving you or providing you with these looks that you so desire?
Love that. My last question for you is going to be, and you touched on some of this as well, as a mother, how do you teach your children not to hate or reciprocate negative behaviors? How does it make you feel when your children come home and share these stories? Obviously, heart-wrenching, as you've stated. And how do you keep yourself from becoming filled with hate or being resentful?
Sure. Of course, I'm heartbroken when they come home, but it doesn't, you all heard from my mom, so that's the person who raised me. It's like, all right, that's it, and that is what it is. But who do we want to be? And who do I want to be? And and so while it hurts and it registers in there, and I have to manage those feelings, and I have to feel those feelings, and I have to find an appropriate place and educating and all of that, there is a type of person that I want to be. And so I have taught my kids, and we have raised our children, be who you are and react to situations because it's who you are, and it's the person that you want to be, and it's how you want to show up to the world. Don't allow other people's behavior to dictate the person that you are. That's a power hemorrhage. And to hate people and to give that hate back, you are relinquishing your own power. And I just refuse to do that. They don't get to have my hate. People who, they just don't. That to me is not, hate begets hate, and violence begets violence. And I don't think that the answer to these types of situations is to teach my children to be hateful. I think it's just the opposite. You got to meet people where they are. And so it's not, the behavior is abhorrent and it's not okay, but you have to see that hurt people, and people who are behaving and engaging in these racist activities and all that, they are damaged, traumatized. They also have things, and this behavior has been learned. And so not to say that behavior is okay, but again, you get to decide, how do I want to be in this situation? And so I tried to teach was given to me from my parents, trying to teach my own kids, to empower them to be great and to know your worth and to know your enoughness in spite of other people's behavior, and to keep showing up. And like I said, people talk about having a seat at the table, having a voice at the table. Hell, build your own table, right? But keep showing up and keep engaging and keep doing the work, because we're better and we can do hard things, like I said, and we're worth it, right? We're in community together. This is not a solitary thing. We're going to have to find a way to engage in people and repair this.
Okay. So we don't have a whole lot of time left today, which we figured, because this is a difficult topic that many people are very interested in knowing about. So what I'd like to do is answer have our panel answer some of the questions that have been brought up, and then hopefully go to some of the do's and don'ts that I think will be interesting. The first question I'd like to look at is, and I'm wondering if Dr. Yvonne, you would be willing to answer this question for us. Let's see here. Sorry, y'all, I'm having some technical difficulty. Okay. Dr. Yvonne, can you hear me?
Okay, I am now unmuted. Can you hear me?
Perfect. Yes, you look beautiful and sound amazing. One of the questions we have today is, some people think that affirmative action is a form of reverse discrimination, and would like to hear the panel's opinion on affirmative action.
That's a really good question. I served on, of course, I was dean, assistant dean, and I was a professor. I held all of these positions at the university, and it is something that was came up all the time. And this is what I tell people in regards to affirmative action. It is not reverse racism. It is giving people of color or any person or group that has been excluded, it is giving them a chance at the starting line. What happens is that you sit on a board and they say, well, we're looking for a PhD in science or some, physics, or, putting rockets to the moon. And then they exclude looking the places where you can find a qualified person. The affirmative action, in my viewpoint, is for the institution to take the measures that they need to take to find the people that they're looking for. If I'm looking for a qualified physicist, okay, and I advertise it only in white universities, or I advertise it only in places where the Black physicists are not likely to find it, okay, and I just use higher education as an example. This could be anything. It could be the local barbershop. It could be the local grocery store. What are you willing to do as an institution to find people who are qualified, to find people of color who are qualified? Once you find the qualified people, then you can begin to make some choices. One of the things that upset me so much about affirmative action was the reaction of the white faculty and administrators who didn't want to do this. So in many cases, how do I know? I was sitting at the table. They would choose unqualified Blacks, and then when they didn't work out, they say, well, there you go. See, we just knew, that's why we've been charring the white ones. There are qualified people of color in all areas, but you have to look for them. So affirmative action is a way to bring people of color to the starting line. It is not reverse racism.
Thank you, Dr. Yvonne. I think that was very well said. Does anyone else on the panel have have an answer or anything they'd like to add? No? Okay. I'd like to ask, or another question was, how do we help stop racial comments or exclusion in group settings without making it worse for the offended? And I'd actually like to take that question, unless someone else on the panel would like to take that question.
Go ahead and take it, April, but I have a little short quippet after you finish.
Please. One thing I'd like to say about this is that it goes back to what I pointed on earlier about having a safe space. If you see something being done wrong, you just stop it. I mean, that's it. I don't know if many people saw the video of the Black gentleman who went into the woods with his white friends maybe a few months ago. Went into the woods, they were going swimming, hanging out, and there just happened to be another group of white people there who decided they didn't like Black people, and they attempted to lynch him, while his friends looked on in horror and were fighting to get him back. In that type of a scenario, number one, I would have loved to have seen someone dial 911, which, they did. But stopping and taking a stand and not being fearful of what the other perpetrators may think of you. And while you may not consider yourself racist, You may have friends around you who you personally know are racist. And that's where the beginning conversation starts. It's in telling them these things aren't okay, and I'm not okay with that. Perhaps as a person of color, I am very used to losing friends easily for standing up for things that are right. And some people may not have had that experience, or they don't feel as comfortable. But I'm always going to, I hope and pray that I always err on the side of right. And if I see someone being excluded in a group, I'm going to stop the exclusion, invite them in. People talk about diversity and inclusion. Diversity is when you have a party and you invite everyone to the party, regardless of race. Inclusion is when someone of another race is saying to another person of another race, hey, let's go on the dance floor and dance, or let's sit down and have this conversation. If everyone's just together, but no one's interacting, no one's been included. And it only opens, to me, more doors to keep those types of racial comments going and that discrimination going. But Dr. Yvonne?
Yes, just a little sidebar to that. When we did the racism workshop, Racism, the Dividing Line, there was a part in there that spoke specifically to that. And it made a point. It said, Blacks can't teach other whites how to behave. Whites must challenge other whites. And so if it is going to be done, the person has to be willing to stand up and challenge other whites. And so that was a little snapshot for people to take away. I can't change your behavior, but if my white classmate challenges another white student, perhaps that will make a difference. With time, it's whites challenging other whites. That was all I needed to say.
Beautiful. One more question, and this is open to any of the panelists. In these stories of moms letting their children display such racist behavior, how would you like to see the moms react or the parents react? Should they interact with you, the person who's being offended personally, or would just seeing them have a conversation with their child be enough? Sue, would you mind addressing that for us if you feel comfortable?
Definitely they should be, I'd like to see them, I mean, everything, they should apologize to the offended person, correct the behavior for the child, I think. And definitely make sure that that child understood. That's the only way it's going to stop is the correction, I think, and for the children to understand that it's not okay.
Yep, I love that. I love that answer. Oh, Piper, do you want to add something to that? You're on mute, Piper.
Okay, just to piggyback on that, Sue's right, you have to correct the behavior, and you also catching it earlier and normalizing other people and their cultures, right? So having books about other cultures, and in your home, having your children's libraries at home full of books and toys, having them be integrated, and having authors, Black authors and Asian authors and natives and all of that. That's what I meant about the education starting at home. If your kid is out at 6, 7, 8 doing this kind of stuff, there's a whole bunch of things that have happened and taken place prior that haven't been addressed. And so now for anybody jumping in, there's just so much. I'm sorry, I kind of went all over the place, but yeah, correct the behavior, but if you can, catch it before it even gets there. Normalize and encourage the learning and the participation of other cultures.
I agree. To add a little bit to that before I ask the last question, and then we'll go on to our poll results. I also would like to say, when addressing your children in a situation such as that, yes, it would be fantastic if that parent could say, I apologize for my child's behavior. I don't think we need a big show. We don't need lots of shouting and yelling. because the other thing you don't want to do is traumatize your child, but you do want to teach them correct behavior and show them in a loving way. And so a simple apology and saying to them, we don't use those types of words in our home because they're hurtful to other people. And then more importantly, find out where they learned that from, because then we need to cut that off, or be able to say, man, if you heard that from Uncle Jack, next time you should politely just tell Uncle Jack, that's just not nice. That's not nice behavior. Children listen and they pay attention. They repeat everything we say, from politics to racism, you name it, they repeat it. They are so smart. I know this because I've worked with children for many years. They're listening to you, and they want to model you. And that's very important to them, and that's human nature. So we're going to take our last question of the day, and then we are going to get our poll results. So I would like to answer this, and anyone else on the panel who's interested in answering it as well. I love this question. Do you think that having more honest, representative curriculum in schools would be helpful? I can't scream yes enough. I wish I'd had this question in advance. I would have put yes on a sheet of paper. I think that when people of color do not know their own history, it is very difficult for them to be able to have a sense of pride, a sense of, I don't want to use the word humanity, but just a sense of self, just not knowing where you're from. Many people can tell you, oh, I'm from this little town in Italy, or my family resides here, or my family fought in the war. Anyone on this talk who goes back and thinks about the curriculum that they learned in school, the only thing that you learned was Huckleberry Finn, the guy who created the cotton gin, something about peanut butter, and I'm being facetious, people, so just know that. Someone who, Martin Luther King and Black people were slaves. You didn't learn anything about Asian culture at all, not even that I can reflect on. So if you are adopted into a family, whether you be Black, Asian, or from another culture, period, if you are adopted into a family who has no interest in learning about your culture, you're not going to know your culture either. The only place you may learn that culture is at school. And right now, it's not being taught at all. And I'll share a super quick story. My youngest daughter, who will be 12 this weekend, participated in Ashburn schools. They live with my husband's ex-wife, and they have an annual school trip where they go to a plantation, which, hey, it's a plantation, whatever. They go to a plantation and they each get to decide, well, they don't get to decide. It is chosen for them if they're going to be a business owner, a slave, or, an owner of slaves, whatnot. There's all these different categories. I thought it was very interesting when I found out that my daughter, who is the only Black child in her class, like Piper's daughter, my family and I often call ourselves the onlys because we are generally the only African Americans at events, which I'm fine with. That's the way I grew up. But to see that her teacher didn't even think twice about the fact that my daughter had pulled what they now call slavery a servant, was pretty upsetting. And I thought to myself, man, you can't be that dense. So I go to the school, I speak to them. They, of course, think I have 3 heads. I go in very politely, and I just say, you couldn't find anything else for her to be after she pulled this? And I explained to them, I said, if my daughter was a 16-year-old, just like Piper's daughter said, if my daughter were a 16-year-old house servant, she would have probably been raped multiple times and have multiple children by the person who owns her. So why would you even put her in that scenario, even if other white children had chosen that as well? So they ended up changing her role. She was a Quaker abolitionist, which I preferred. I'll just put it that way. But just thinking about little things like that when most people don't even think of them, how devastating that can be for a child. And I explained to my then 10-year-old that same scenario. You would have been a slave, you would have been raped multiple times, passed around. That would have been your life. And servants get paid. Slaves don't. And that was the biggest takeaway for me. So anyway, that's going to be our last question for that one, but we're going to get our poll results, and then we're going to go over some do's and don'ts. I apologize. We may be about 5 minutes over, and we will go from there. So our poll results, 46% of you said, answered that they had heard, and remember, select any that applied, if you had heard any statements or compliments that you have said or anyone else said. 46% of you said, answered yes to, why is the Confederate flag a bad thing? 40% said they were familiar with the statement, where are you from? No, really, where? 75% were very familiar with, I do not see color or race. 35%, you do not talk or act Black. 21% said, can you speak your language? 48% have heard, I wish I was as dark as you. I wish I had your skin tone. 46% said racism doesn't exist anymore. And 35%, why do people of color say they don't have equal rights? I think that's a very large number of people. And we are going to go through a few of these as quickly as we possibly can just to answer questions. And anything that we don't get through, like Jen Gerlach and Caitlin Walsh stated, we will videotape it for you. I want to start with, let's see here. I'm going to start with the do's and don'ts. We'll go there because that answers some of it. It says, do take the time, okay, so do's and don'ts. If, do take the time to educate yourself and stay relevant. And what we mean by that is don't use old racial terminology such as Oriental, or putting everyone in as Spanish, or even colored. I've heard the word colored used more times since I've lived in Frederick in the last 8 years than I've heard in my entire life. And I actually mean that. If you're unsure which race someone prefers to go by, ask yourself, is their color or ethnicity imperative to the conversation? Why bring it up? Do be yourself and continue to have open communication. Don't compliment a person of color's skin tone. As much as you may think it's a pretty or unique look, it may bring unwanted reactions. DNA plays a huge role in the skin tone of people of color. A person of color may be lighter than someone of the same ethnicity due to centuries of rape put upon by their ancestors. It also sends the message that one skin tone is better than another, and that is not a compliment. And that ties into colorism. And you can write that down. I won't go over that today, but that's a very important term that you should know about. And it's basically people of other cultures stating, because the lighter you are, the better you are. That is what a lot of people are taught. Do be inquisitive about other ethnic groups and cultures. Don't ask direct questions. People will share with you based on how comfortable they feel with you. Don't assume people know their culture based on their color or ethnicity. Again, I stated earlier, if you were a person who was adopted by a family of another culture, that may not be something that was taught to you. Some of you may be asking, how do I start a conversation about race? The best place to start a conversation about race is at home, asking your children and or partner about how you see race as individuals and as a family. Approach your family with a gentle tone, especially if you know that you have friends or family who are racist. Integrate empathy into the conversation using statements such as racism creates different realities for people of color in our society. For family members who may be more difficult to reach, reiterate, we're not calling them the enemy. However, with whites making up 72% of the population, people of color need help to spread the message and make a difference. Do not feel awkward at speaking out for fear of being presumptuous or of somehow occupying the space that someone Black or another person of color should be taking up in the public sphere or in the private one of discussion. Are there any additional pieces that any of the panelists would like to add before I go on to our final statements?
Were you going to say anything about the I do not see color, that one? Because I want to.
So I'm going to let you take that one on, Piper.
Okay, since that, and I noticed that was the big one. I think that was probably one.
Yeah, that was the biggest one.
If you don't see color, then you don't see me. And, you know, I understand the premise, and I think people of color understand the premise of what you're trying to say is that I'm not racist. And I get that. But it's important for you to see color, to see us, because then as we're sharing stories, you understand, as April just said, racism creates a different reality for me and for Sue and for other people of color. My experiences are going to be different than yours. And I need you to believe me and to hear me when I tell you what's happening. If you don't see my color and you know, you see me as you see yourself, then you can't help me. You can't help us. You can't benefit the cause, if you will, if you refuse to acknowledge the difference. And if you are, you know, as a person who is of Italian descent or Russian descent or whatever European descent, and you're proud of that and you're excited about that and you want to share that and you dress that way and, you know, your food, it shows all of that. You want people to see that and to notice that. That's the same for a lot of people of color. If they're tapped into their culture and that kind of thing, they want that to be seen and acknowledged and celebrated and respected as well. So please, please, please do not say that you don't see color. Plus, that's not true. You absolutely see color, and it's just a false statement, and then it makes everything else that follows suspect. So that's it.
Thank you, Piper. Very, very well said. I'm going to go ahead and close us out and just say that, sorry, ladies, hang in there with me. That's my paper here. You know what? I'm just going to speak from the heart on this one. I just would like to say thank you to all of our panelists, everyone at the Chamber of Commerce, Jen Gerlach and Caitlin Walsh. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for participating in today's panel. And I would like to leave the conversation with everyone thinking on a statement that my 16-year-old daughter said to me yesterday that she asked me to share. And that is really along the lines with what we're all saying today. Talk to your kids. Speak to them in a way that they can understand what you're saying. Monitor what it is that they're watching, who they're speaking with, their friends. This is just like racism is, I don't want to say it's just like any other thing. I think it's different. But in the way that you would monitor your children listening to profanity or watching pornography or taking part in vaping or smoking or whatever it is, teen drinking, there's so many things. This is just as important. This will help them to become better, well-rounded human beings. And as my daughter stated, this just won't stop. The pain won't stop. The first time she was ever called nigger, she was 8 by a classmate. And if we don't talk to our children and just assume that our children aren't exposed, haven't been exposed, aren't speaking to other children who are racist, that is very incorrect just based on her story alone. 8 years old, no one should have to explain why you were called nigger at 8. So thank you again, everyone, for joining us today. I hope that everyone can walk away with great ideas on how to approach their friends and family to continue this conversation. Everyone stay safe. And again, thank you so much just for participating in SHE Week. We really appreciate it. Thank you, everyone. And thank you to our panelists. Thank you.